My name is Paul Miller, and I'm 42 years old. This happened last fall at Spruce Knob, the highest peak in West Virginia. I had just finalized my divorce, packed up my life, and hit the road in an RV that still smelled like the dealership. I told myself this trip was about reconnecting with nature, about finding some clarity, but really, I was running from guilt, loneliness, and the wreckage of a life I'd built and then broken. I chose Spruce Knob because it was isolated, and isolation was exactly what I thought I needed. I didn't know the stories. I didn't know about the Devil's Rock. If I had, I'd like to think I would have turned back, but honestly, I don't know if I could have resisted. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun slipping behind the ridge as I parked my RV at a campsite near the summit. The forest here was dense, the spruce trees standing like sentinels in the fading light. I set up a small fire and sat by it, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. That's when I met Eli. He was the kind of man who looked like he belonged in the mountains, tall, broad-shouldered, and weathered like an old oak tree. I'd stopped by the trailhead earlier to get a map, and he must have noticed the out-of-date plates on my RV because he wandered over to introduce himself. "You're new around here," he said, his voice gravelly but not unkind. "Just passing through," I replied. We talked for a while, mostly about the trails and the weather. Then, as if it were an afterthought, Eli asked, "You hear about the Devil's Rock yet?" I shook my head, curious despite myself. "It's an old legend," he said, leaning against a tree. "There's a boulder deep in the woods, smooth as glass, they say. Folks claim if you touch it, you can make a wish, but it always comes at a price." I laughed nervously. "And what's the price?" Eli's eyes darkened. "Depends. Sometimes it's your sanity, sometimes it's worse." I tried to brush it off as campfire talk, but his tone stayed with me long after he walked away. The first night was uneventful, but strange things started happening the next day. I set out on one of the trails Eli had recommended, hoping to clear my head and maybe snap a few photos. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots crunching on the dirt. That's when I noticed the trail veering off to the right, unmarked and overgrown. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to follow it. The path twisted through the trees, narrowing until I reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a massive boulder, smooth and black, its surface glinting faintly in the dim light. Dead trees surrounded it, their branches bare and skeletal. I didn't stay long. There was something about the place that made my skin crawl. That night, the tapping started. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping against the side of the RV. I froze, my heart pounding. It sounded like someone or something was knocking. But when I finally mustered the courage to look outside, there was nothing there. The next morning I found small handprints in the dirt outside the RV. They were faint, but unmistakable, as if left by a child. I shook it off as my imagination. But later that day, I saw her. She was standing just off the trail, a teenage girl with pale skin and long, dark hair. She wore a tattered dress that looked like something out of a history book, and her eyes were wide and pleading. "Are you lost?" I called out. She nodded, but didn't speak. I stepped toward her, but before I could get close, she turned and darted into the woods. I chased after her, shouting for her to wait, but she disappeared, leaving no trace but a trail of faint footprints leading toward the clearing. When I returned to the RV, the unease I'd been feeling turned into something darker. I couldn't shake the girl's image from my mind, her hollow eyes and the way she seemed to vanish into thin air. That night, I dreamed about the Devil's Rock. In the dream, the girl was sitting on the boulder, her hands resting on its smooth surface. Her voice was soft but insistent. "It can give you what you want." When I woke, I couldn't get her words out of my head. The next morning, I decided to find the boulder again. I didn't know what I was expecting. Answers, maybe, or closure. The unmarked trail was easier to find this time, as if it had been waiting for me. The clearing was just as I remembered it, the boulder looming in the center like some ancient monolith. The air was heavy, the kind of heaviness that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. And then she appeared. The girl stood on the far side of the boulder, her expression vacant. She raised a hand, motioning for me to come closer. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed her hand on the boulder and whispered, "It can give you what you want." I hesitated, my heart pounding. The memory of my family, the laughter of my kids, the warmth of my ex-wife's smile flooded my mind. I hadn't seen them in months, and the thought of a second chance was intoxicating. Before I could stop myself, I reached out and touched the rock. At first, nothing happened. I felt a faint vibration beneath my fingers, but that was all. Disappointed, I returned to the RV, trying to convince myself it had been a foolish impulse. But that evening, my phone rang. It was my ex-wife. "I've been thinking about us," she said, her voice tentative. "Maybe we should talk." The weight in my chest lifted, replaced by a flicker of hope. I thought the rock had worked, that I'd been given a miracle. But the miracle came with a price. That night, the girl returned. She appeared outside the RV, her face pressed against the window. Her eyes were no longer pleading. They were dark, empty voids that seemed to suck the air from the room. "You made your wish," she whispered. "Now it's time to pay." The lights in the RV flickered, and the shadows inside began to twist and rise. I grabbed a flashlight and stumbled outside, shouting into the darkness. "What do you want from me?" Her voice came from everywhere at once. "It's not me, it's the rock." Desperate, I raced back to the clearing. The forest seemed alive, the trees closing in around me as I ran. When I reached the boulder, it seemed larger, its surface pulsing like a living thing. The girl appeared again, her form shifting and flickering like a glitch in a video. "You can't undo it," she said, her voice echoing, "but you can stop it from taking more." I grabbed a hammer from my pack and swung it at the boulder. The impact sent a shockwave through the clearing, and the girl screamed, her voice merging with the sound of the rock cracking. The boulder split down the middle, a deafening roar echoing through the forest. The girl collapsed, her form dissolving into mist as the air grew still. When I woke the next morning, the clearing was empty. The boulder was gone, reduced to a pile of rubble. I returned to the RV and called my ex-wife, apologizing for everything. Whatever chance we had at reconciliation, I knew it had to come from me, not from some cursed rock. As I drove away from Spruce Knob, I caught a glimpse of the girl in my rearview mirror, standing among the trees. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't angry either. She was just watching. Sometimes the things we want most come at a price too steep to pay, and sometimes we have to let go to move forward. My name is Carol Sanders. I'm 33 years old, and this happened last October in Blackwater Falls State Park, West Virginia. I had just landed my first solo freelance assignment, a travel feature for an outdoor magazine. It was my chance to prove to myself, and maybe to a few others, that I could thrive on my own after leaving a toxic relationship. I didn't expect the park's breathtaking beauty to be marred by whispers of the past, or that those whispers would grow louder with each passing night. When I first arrived, the park was everything I'd hoped for. My RV fit snugly into a secluded campsite overlooking the gorge, the roar of the falls constant in the distance. Blackwater Falls was a photographer's dream. Cascading water, mist rising through the gorge, and vibrant autumn foliage painted in fiery reds and oranges. The first day was perfect. I hiked, shot hundreds of photos, and scribbled notes about the trails and wildlife. The peace and quiet were a balm, exactly what I needed after months of turmoil. That evening, I sat by the fire, sipping tea and scrolling through my shots. That's when I saw it for the first time. At the edge of one frame, a figure stood between two trees. It was a man, his clothes ragged and his face shadowed. I frowned, zooming in, but the details remained blurred. I didn't remember seeing anyone during my hike, and the figure hadn't appeared in any other photos. I shook it off as an optical illusion, probably a trick of light and shadows, and went to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The second day brought strange encounters. I started the morning by stopping at the visitor center, hoping to get some local insight. The woman behind the counter, Maggie, was friendly but seemed to be watching me too closely. She eyed my camera gear and smiled knowingly. "Planning to photograph the falls?" she asked. "That's the idea," I replied. Maggie hesitated, her smile faltering. "Be careful around the falls, especially near dusk. The dead don't like company." I blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Before I could ask more, she turned to help another guest, leaving me with a vague unease. Later, on a trail to the falls, I ran into Gary, a park ranger. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and a genial demeanor. As he gave me a quick overview of the park's history, I brought up Maggie's warning. He chuckled. "Oh, that's just local folklore. Back in the Civil War, there was a Confederate soldier who hid out in the gorge. They say he deserted his regiment and was hunted down near the falls. Some folks claim his spirit never left, but I've worked here for years and never seen a thing." I tried to laugh with him, but his words stayed with me. That evening, the first real sign of something unnatural occurred. I set up my tripod near the falls, hoping to capture the golden hour light. As I framed the shot, my breath caught. The air around me had turned frigid, my breath fogging in front of me despite the mild weather. My camera refused to focus, the lens shuddering as if something was blocking it. And then, faint but unmistakable, I heard whispers. I spun around, expecting to see other hikers, but I was alone. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and indecipherable, like a crowd speaking just out of earshot. The unease became unbearable, and I packed up in a rush, leaving the falls as the last light of day faded. That night, back at the RV, I reviewed the day's photos. Most were stunning, the falls bathed in warm, golden light, but in 3 of them, the figure from the previous day appeared again. This time, he was closer. Standing at the edge of the water, his face was clearer now, pale, gaunt, with dark hollows where his eyes should have been. And in the last photo, he was staring directly at the camera. I slammed my laptop shut and locked the RV door. The next morning, I debated cutting the trip short, but a part of me couldn't let it go. I'd always prided myself on being rational, and I wasn't going to let a few strange occurrences ruin my assignment. While hiking near the falls, I noticed an overgrown side trail. Curiosity tugged at me, and I followed it, ducking beneath low-hanging branches. It led to a clearing where the air felt heavier, almost oppressive. In the center of the clearing was a patch of disturbed earth, as though something had been buried there long ago. Nearby, I found an object half buried in the dirt, a weathered leather journal. The pages were brittle but legible, written in a looping, old-fashioned script. The entries told the story of a Confederate soldier who had deserted his regiment and fled into the gorge. His words were filled with fear and desperation. "The nights grow colder, and I hear them coming. I cannot outrun my fate." The last entry read, "They will find me tonight. I will not see another sunrise." I closed the journal, my hands trembling. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the oppressive feeling returned. The RV's lights flickered and shadows danced across the walls, moving in ways that didn't match the firelight outside. And then I saw him. The soldier stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the firelight. He didn't move, didn't blink, but his hollow eyes locked onto mine. My chest tightened with fear as I realized he wasn't alone. Shadows emerged from the trees, darker and more twisted, their forms writhing like smoke. They whispered accusations, voices overlapping in a cacophony. "Traitor, coward, you will not leave." Panicking, I grabbed the journal and held it up. "Is this what you want?" I shouted. The soldier's expression shifted, sadness, perhaps gratitude, and he gestured toward the disturbed earth I'd seen earlier. I understood. Clutching the journal, I ran back to the clearing. The shadows followed, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. My hands shook as I placed the journal on the grave and whispered a quiet prayer for peace. The air around me grew still. The shadows stopped, their forms dissolving into the night. The soldier lingered for a moment longer, his hollow eyes softening before fading into the mist. By morning, the oppressive feeling had lifted. The forest seemed brighter, the air lighter, and for the first time in days, I felt safe. Before leaving, I stopped at the visitor center to return the journal. Maggie was there, her knowing smile greeting me. "You helped him, didn't you?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, unsure how to respond. She reached out, patting my hand. "He's free now. You did a good thing." As I drove away from Blackwater Falls, I realized the experience had changed me. I didn't have all the answers, but I no longer felt the weight of doubt and fear that had followed me into the park. Sometimes the past lingers in ways we can't explain, and sometimes all it takes to move forward is to lay it to rest. My name is Mary Bryant, and I was 28 when this happened. It was the summer of 2021, and I was in Greenbrier Valley, West Virginia, filming a documentary on Appalachian folklore. I thought I knew what I was getting into, a little spooky local history, some beautiful landscapes, and maybe a few nervous laughs from my friends. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It all started with Elliot, my best friend since college. Elliot's a big guy with a soft heart and an even softer spot for ghost stories. He's the one who got me into the supernatural in the first place, which is how we ended up planning this trip to the abandoned Greenbrier ghost tracks. He called it the perfect setting for my project. Elliot's girlfriend, Marcy, wasn't so enthusiastic. She's sarcastic to the bone and has a knack for poking holes in everyone's plans. Haunted train tracks? Really? She scoffed when we pitched it. What's next? A seance in the Walmart parking lot. Still, she came along, probably because she didn't trust us to survive a weekend in the woods without her. Dan and Ruby rounded out the group. Dan's the life of the party, always cracking jokes and pushing boundaries, while Ruby's quiet, but she notices everything. I've known her for years, and she's got this sixth sense about people and places. It was Ruby who first warned us that something felt off. We got to the tracks late that afternoon. The forest was thick and green, the air heavy with humidity. The tracks were almost invisible beneath layers of moss and tangled weeds. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd miss them entirely. But the locals hadn't forgotten. They called them the ghost tracks because of the Iron Witch, a spirit said to haunt the area. Legend had it she'd been accused of witchcraft and hanged near the tracks in the 1800s. Before she died, she cursed the town, vowing to haunt anyone who trespassed on her land. The legend didn't scare me. It fascinated me. "We're filming history," I said, adjusting my camera as we set up camp. The clearing wasn't ideal. Dan's tent had a broken pole, and Marcy realized she'd forgotten extra flashlight batteries, but it would do. By the time we got a fire going, the sun was dipping below the trees, painting the sky a deep orange. The first sign of trouble came after dinner. We were sitting around the fire, laughing at one of Dan's ridiculous impressions, when the forest went silent. Not gradually, like you'd expect when animals settle in for the night, but all at once, like someone had hit a switch. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence. Ruby was the first to speak. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feel what?" Dan said, grinning. "The sweet, sweet vibe of nature?" Ruby didn't laugh. "Something's wrong," she said. "We're not supposed to be here." Marcy rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, it's just the woods at night. Stop trying to scare us." But I felt it too, that heavy, oppressive stillness. I tried to brush it off as nerves. I mean, I was the one who dragged us all out here, right? If anyone needed to stay rational, it was me. The second sign came a little after midnight. We were settling into our tents when we heard it. A low, rhythmic hum. Faint, but distinct, like the sound of an old train engine in the distance. Dan poked his head out of his tent, grinning. "Is that your ghost train, Jess?" "Probably just the wind," I said, though my voice sounded thin even to me. "Yeah, right. When does the wind go chugga-chugga-choo-choo?" Marcy muttered. Ruby sat bolt upright, clutching her sleeping bag. "It's not wind," she whispered. "It's her." I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the tent ceiling, listening to that sound. It got louder and louder, like the train was barreling straight toward us, and then it stopped. not faded, stopped. I scrambled out of my tent, flashlight in hand, and found the others already outside. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the clearing. "What the hell was that?" Elliot asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I said, "but we should stay together." Ruby was the first to notice the scratches on the trees. Deep, jagged marks, like something or someone had taken a blade to the bark. The scratches formed strange symbols, almost like runes. I filmed them, though my hands were trembling so badly the footage probably came out useless. "This is messed up," Marcy said, backing away. "We need to leave, now." Dan laughed nervously. "What? And missed the big ghost reveal? Come on, Marcy, it's just some local pranksters messing with us." But Ruby shook her head. "No one's been here in years," she said. "This isn't a prank." The third sign came when Marcy disappeared. She'd stormed off after another argument with Elliot, saying she needed some space. We waited, calling her name, but she didn't come back. Finally, Elliot and I grabbed our flashlights and went looking for her, leaving Ruby and Dan by the fire. We found her an hour later, stumbling out of the trees, her arms scratched and bleeding. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. "Marcy, what happened?" I asked, rushing to her side. She looked at me, trembling. "I heard you," she said, "calling me, but it wasn't you. It wasn't you." Back at camp, things went from bad to worse. Dan tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes about camping with Casper, but even he couldn't hide how scared he was. Ruby sat by the fire, staring into the flames, muttering something under her breath. "What's she doing?" I whispered to Elliot. "Praying, I think," he said. "Her grandmother told her about this place, said it was cursed." The attack came just before dawn. We were packing up, ready to leave, when the forest exploded with noise. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, something heavy crashing through the underbrush. And then it hit Dan. I don't know how to describe it. One moment he was standing there, cracking a joke. The next, he was flying backwards, slamming into a tree with a sickening crack. He screamed, clutching his leg, which was bent at an unnatural angle. "Get him up!" I yelled. But the thing, whatever it was, wasn't done. It circled us, its shadow flickering in the firelight. I caught glimpses of it. Long limbs, pale skin stretched tight over bones, and a face. God, that face. It wasn't human. Ruby saved us. She grabbed a knife from her bag, slicing her palm and letting her blood drip onto the ground. She chanted something in a language I didn't understand, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. The thing stopped, its head tilted like it was listening, and then it vanished. We carried Dan out of the woods, Marcy supporting one side of him, Elliot and I taking the other. Ruby led the way, her bloody hand pressed to her chest. We didn't stop until we reached the road. Days later, I reviewed the footage. Most of it was unusable. Shaky shots, too dark to see anything. But there was one clip that made my blood run cold. It showed me, standing by the fire, filming the group, and behind me, in the shadows, was the figure. It was watching us. I haven't been back to Greenbrier since. I don't think I ever will. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that hum again, the sound of a train that doesn't exist, and I wonder if the Iron Witch is still out there, waiting for her next trespassers. My name is Brian Gibson, and I was 42 years old when this happened in the summer of 2023. After retiring from the military, I spent most of my days traveling the country in my RV, searching for something I couldn't quite name. Peace, maybe, or just a sense of purpose. I'd spent decades in combat zones, surrounded by noise and chaos, and I thought the wilderness might silence the ghosts in my head. That's what brought me to the Laurel Fork Wilderness in West Virginia. I'd heard about the area from a fellow camper, a secluded stretch of forest, untouched and serene, perfect for someone like me who preferred solitude. I didn't know then about the stories surrounding Devil's Hollow or the witch that locals claimed had cursed the land. If I had, I might have gone somewhere else. Or maybe not. The first day was uneventful. The road to my chosen campsite was narrow and bumpy, the kind of terrain that tested your patience and your vehicle. My RV wasn't new, but it had served me well over the years. Still, it groaned and sputtered as I navigated the steep incline toward the hollow. About a mile from my intended spot, the engine stalled. I cursed under my breath, turning the key repeatedly, but all I got was the tired whine of a machine that had had enough. I grabbed my tools, hoping it was something simple, but as the hours dragged on, it became clear that I wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. "Well," I muttered, wiping grease from my hands, "guess this is home for now." I set up camp just off the road, close enough to the hollow to feel its presence, but far enough to keep my distance. The air was cooler here, the shadows deeper. I told myself it was just the terrain, the dense canopy blocking out the sun, but there was something else too, a heaviness I couldn't explain. The first night I slept poorly. The forest was too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak and rustle. I'd spent enough time in the wild to know the sounds of nocturnal animals, but this was different. There were no owls, no crickets, nothing but the occasional groan of the wind through the trees. At some point, I thought I heard something outside the RV, a faint scratching like claws against metal. I froze, listening, but it stopped as quickly as it had started. When I finally worked up the nerve to look, flashlight in hand, there was nothing there. Just the endless expanse of trees. I told myself it was the wind and went back to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. The next morning I found the dead birds. They were arranged in a perfect circle about 10 feet from my RV, their feathers ruffled but otherwise untouched. There were no signs of an attack, no blood, just 7 small bodies, their lifeless eyes staring up at the canopy. My stomach churned as I stood over them, trying to make sense of it. Predators don't do this. Even kids pulling pranks wouldn't bother hiking this far out. I buried them more out of respect than anything else, and spent the rest of the day exploring the area. The forest was dense, the trails barely more than animal paths winding through the underbrush. About a mile in, I found the first symbol. It was carved into the bark of a tree, a jagged spiral surrounded by smaller runes I didn't recognize. The cuts were fresh, the edges of the bark still raw. My first thought was kids again, but the precision of the carvings made me second guess. This wasn't random graffiti. It meant something, though I didn't know what. That night, the storm rolled in. The wind howled through the hollow, rain hammering against the roof of the RV. I huddled inside, reading by flashlight, the sound of the storm oddly comforting. It drowned out the silence, the oppressive weight of the forest. But then the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind, the way it curled around the trees, carrying the echoes of distant sounds. But as I listened, the whispers grew more distinct, more deliberate. They weren't words exactly, but they carried intent, a low, murmuring chant that made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it, burying my head in my book, but the sound burrowed into my mind. It felt like it was coming from inside the RV, pressing against my skull. And then I saw her. She stood just outside the window, barely visible through the rain-streaked glass. A cloaked figure, her face hidden in the shadows of her hood. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, but her presence was suffocating. I grabbed my flashlight and swung open the door, but by the time I stepped outside, she was gone. The next day, I found the grave marker. It was tucked deep within the hollow, a small stone slab half buried in moss and dirt. The name was barely legible, worn down by centuries of weather. Margaret Ellis. Beside it, I found a charred leather diary, its pages brittle and stained. I flipped through it carefully, piecing together fragments of Margaret's story. She wasn't a witch, not in the way the legends claimed. She'd been a healer, accused by her neighbors when a plague swept through the settlement. They blamed her for the deaths, dragging her into the hollow and burning her at the stake. Her final entry was a curse, scrawled in trembling handwriting. "To those who condemned me, I curse this hollow with my dying breath. May your bloodline suffer as I have suffered, and may no soul find peace in this cursed place." That night was the worst. The storm returned, fiercer than before, and the whispers gave way to screams. They were everywhere, echoing off the walls of the RV, filling every corner with their anguish. The cloaked figure appeared again, closer this time. She stood in the middle of the clearing, her hood pulled back to reveal a face that was both beautiful and grotesque, her eyes burning like embers. "Why did you come here?" she asked, her voice a low growl that vibrated in my chest. My throat tightened, the words catching like barbed wire. "I didn't know," I managed to say, her expression twisted into a sneer. "They never know." She raised a hand and the world tilted. I fell to my knees, my vision blurring as memories flooded my mind. Moments I'd tried so hard to forget. The sounds of gunfire, the screams of my comrades, the smell of blood and burning sand. "Stop!" I shouted, clutching my head. "Please stop!" The screams faded, replaced by her laughter. "You carry death with you, soldier," she said. "Why should I spare you?" Desperate, I fumbled for my dog tags, ripping them from my neck. "I'm sorry," I choked out, holding them up. "For whatever they did to you, I'm sorry." Her laughter stopped. She stared at the tags, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she lowered her hand. The storm ceased. The whispers faded, and she was gone. The next morning, I left the hollow. My RV started without a hitch, as if the past few days had been nothing more than a bad dream. But as I drove down the winding road, I couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret Ellis was watching me, her presence lingering in the shadows. I don't know if I appeased her or if she simply let me go. But I do know one thing. There are places in this world that remember the horrors done to them, places that hold grudges, and Devil's Hollow is one of them. My name is Paul Miller, and I'm 31 years old. This happened last October during a weekend trip to the Hoosac Tunnel in Florida, Massachusetts. I didn't go there to hunt ghosts or find proof of the paranormal. I went there to prove it didn't exist. I've made a career out of debunking urban legends. My blog, Rational Wanderer, had been steadily growing in popularity thanks to my deep dives into haunted locations across America. The Hoosac Tunnel, nicknamed the Bloody Pit, was my next target. People swore it was cursed, that the restless spirits of the workers who died during its construction haunted its cold, damp corridors. Hundreds of men perished in dynamite blasts, collapses, and drownings when the tunnel was being built. All of that made for a great ghost story, but I was certain there was a rational explanation behind every sighting and sound. That's why I parked my RV in a small clearing just outside the eastern entrance of the tunnel. It was late afternoon, and the woods around me were quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. The tunnel loomed ahead, its dark mouth swallowing the sunlight. I grabbed my camera, journal, and an EMF meter, a gadget ghost hunters use that I planned to use to show there was no unusual activity, and stepped out. I spent the first hour walking around the entrance, filming the overgrown tracks and crumbling stone walls. Everything seemed normal, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't oppressive. Not at first. Just an itch at the back of my neck, the kind that makes you glance over your shoulder even when you know no one's there. The first sign that something was off came when I tried to fly my drone. I wanted aerial shots of the tunnel and surrounding forest. But as soon as it lifted off, the drone veered sharply to the left, ignoring my controls. I brought it down, checked it for damage, and tried again. This time, it wouldn't even turn on. I shrugged it off, blaming the damp air. I wasn't so quick to dismiss the next event. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I set up my gear inside the RV to review the footage I'd taken. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper. So soft, I thought it was the wind at first. I froze, straining to listen. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Lisa." I laughed nervously, telling myself I must have imagined it. But when I turned off the lights in the RV, I saw something through the window. A shadowy figure stood near the tree line, unmoving, its shape barely visible in the dim light of the rising moon. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, but by the time I got there, the figure was gone. The only sound was the crunch of leaves under my boots and the pounding of my heart. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the RV, every rustle of leaves had me on edge. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I noticed was that the coffee mug I'd left on the counter was shattered on the floor. My journal had been moved, open to a page I hadn't written on, and my flashlight, the one I'd used the night before, refused to turn off, even with the batteries removed. Still, I pressed on. I'd come here to disprove the legends, and I wasn't going to let a few strange occurrences scare me away. I spent the day exploring the tunnel itself. The temperature dropped sharply as I stepped inside, the air thick with moisture and the scent of mildew. My footsteps echoed against the damp stone walls. The EMF meter flickered erratically, spiking for a few seconds before dropping back to normal. As I ventured deeper, the faint whispers returned. This time, they sounded like a distant conversation, the words unintelligible, but the tone urgent, almost pleading. I stopped walking, holding my breath, and the whispers stopped too. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. No answer. I continued forward, shining my flashlight along the walls. About 50 feet in, I noticed something odd, a set of muddy footprints, far fresher than they should have been. They led deeper into the tunnel, and against my better judgment, I followed them. The footprints stopped abruptly in the middle of the tunnel. There was no side passage, no indication of where whoever or whatever had made them had gone. As I crouched to examine them, I heard the sound of metal screeching. It was faint at first, like the distant groan of a train slowing to a stop, but it grew louder and louder until it was deafening. I whipped around, expecting to see headlights barreling toward me, but the tunnel was empty. Still, the sound persisted, echoing through the darkness. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in the RV, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart felt like it was about to explode, and my mind raced with questions. There was no train scheduled to run through the Hoosac Tunnel, not anymore. So what the hell had I just heard? That night, I decided to stay awake, determined to catch whatever was causing the disturbances. Around 3 a.m., I saw it again, the shadowy figure near the tree line. This time, I didn't go outside. I sat frozen in my seat, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. The figure didn't move, it just stood there watching. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my camera and stepped outside, determined to confront it. But as soon as I left the RV, the figure disappeared. In its place, I found something else, a small leather-bound journal, half buried in the dirt. I picked it up and flipped through its brittle pages. It appeared to be a diary written by one of the tunnel workers in the 1860s. The entries were short and frantic, detailing accidents, deaths, and an overwhelming sense of doom. One line stood out to me: "We disturbed something in the mountain. Now it will not let us leave." My name is Jonathan Martin. I'm 44 years old, and last summer, I drove my RV into the heart of the Freetown Fall River State Forest in Massachusetts. I had come to write about the area's infamous reputation, a hotspot for supernatural legends, cult activity, and bizarre phenomena. I didn't believe in any of it, not really. I was just a writer looking for a good story, something to draw attention to my blog, and maybe finally get a real following. After my divorce, I had thrown myself into work, taking solo trips across the country, chasing oddities and urban legends. This trip wasn't supposed to be any different, but what happened over the next 3 days still haunts me. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun dipping low behind a canopy of ancient trees. My GPS had failed about 15 minutes earlier, leaving me to navigate the maze-like dirt roads on my own. The deeper I drove, the narrower the paths became, the trees pressing closer, their gnarled branches scraping against the RV like claws. Finally, I found an unmarked pull-off that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Overgrown, uneven, but quiet. Perfect. I parked, grabbed my gear, and stepped outside. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no rustling leaves, no distant hum of traffic, just stillness, thick and unnatural. It should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. I shook off the unease, telling myself it was just the isolation, and started setting up camp. The trouble began almost immediately. I planned to spend the first evening jotting down notes about the area's history, strange disappearances, stories of ghostly apparitions, rumors of cult rituals in the 1970s. But as I went to plug in my laptop, the RV's backup power refused to work. "Come on," I muttered, fiddling with the connections. Nothing. My phone, too, was useless. No signal and a battery draining faster than it should have. Annoyed but not panicked, I lit a lantern and set up my notebook instead. Outside, the forest seemed to close in tighter as darkness fell. It started with footsteps. I was sitting by the fire, the warm glow flickering across the trees when I heard them. Soft, deliberate, like someone walking barefoot on the forest floor. "Hello?" I called, shining my flashlight into the darkness. The beam caught only trees and shadows. The footsteps stopped. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for some kind of movement, a voice, anything. When nothing came, I convinced myself it was just an animal and returned to the fire. But the unease lingered. The next morning, I decided to explore the trails. I left the RV and followed a faint path that twisted through the woods, marked occasionally by faded red blazes on the trees. The forest was dense, almost suffocating, and the farther I went, the more I felt like I was being watched. Halfway down the trail, I saw something, or someone. A figure stood far ahead, shrouded in the morning mist. It was tall, impossibly still, and cloaked in shadow. "Hey!" I called, my voice echoing back at me. The figure didn't move. I took a step forward, and just like that, it was gone. 1 second there, the next, nothing but empty forest. That night, things escalated. I was sitting by the fire again, trying to shake off the memory of the figure, when a voice whispered my name. "David." I froze, my blood running cold. It wasn't loud, barely more than a breath, but it was unmistakable. "Who's there?" I said, standing and scanning the woods with my flashlight. No answer. Just the crackling fire and the suffocating quiet. Then the voice came again, closer this time. "I can help you, David." The fire flickered violently, as if caught in a sudden gust of wind, but the air was still. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "I want to help you," it said, smooth and almost kind. "You've been searching, haven't you? For meaning, for purpose. I can give it to you. All you have to do is ask." I stumbled back into the RV, locking the door behind me, but even there, I didn't feel safe. The next day, I told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, isolation, maybe even gas fumes leaking into the RV. I tried to rationalize it all, but the forest wouldn't let me forget. That afternoon, while hiking, I found strange carvings etched into the trees. Symbols I didn't recognize, some spiraling, others jagged and crude. Around them, the ground was littered with animal bones arranged in deliberate patterns. The air felt heavier there, colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched again. That night, the entity revealed itself. I was lying in bed when the RV began to shake, not violently, but enough to make me sit up in alarm. Then I heard it again, the voice. "David, come outside." "No," I whispered, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. "Come outside," it repeated, more insistent this time. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay inside, I opened the door. It was there, standing at the edge of the firelight. The figure was cloaked, its face obscured by shadows. It was tall, unnaturally so, its presence overwhelming, and though I couldn't see its eyes, I felt them boring into me, heavy with intent. "What do you want?" I croaked. "I can give you what you desire," it said, its voice deep and resonant. "Recognition, success, freedom from your pain. All you have to do is write about me. Spread my story, my name." I shook my head, backing away. "No, this is insane." The figure didn't move, but the shadows around it began to shift, coiling like living things. "If you refuse," it said, "you will never leave this forest." I ran. The moment the words left its mouth, I bolted into the woods, not caring which direction I went. My flashlight bobbed wildly, casting fleeting glimpses of trees and shadows. But no matter how far I ran, I kept ending up back at the campsite. Over and over, the same clearing, the same fire pit, the same suffocating dread. The entity was waiting for me each time, silent and patient. Eventually, I collapsed, my body trembling with exhaustion. "I'll do it," I whispered. "I'll write about you." The air shifted immediately, the oppressive weight lifting as the shadows receded. The figure stepped closer, holding out a long, clawed hand. "Write my name," it said, its voice almost gentle now, "and you may go." My hand shook as I scribbled the name it gave me into my notebook. The moment I finished, the figure vanished, and the forest fell deathly silent. I woke the next morning in my RV, parked at the forest's entrance as if none of it had happened. But my notebook was still there, open to the page where I'd written the name, and I knew deep down that I couldn't ignore what had happened. I published the story on my blog later that week. It went viral almost instantly, drawing thousands of readers from around the world. But strange things started happening after that. Electronics malfunctioned. Readers reported seeing shadows in their homes after reading the post. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the voice again, whispering my name. I don't know what I've unleashed, but I know it's not finished with me yet. My name is Stephen Gibson, and I'm 40 years old. This happened in the summer of last year in the dense woods of Mount Greylock Reservation, Massachusetts, near a place ominously called Devil's Den. It wasn't meant to be a terrifying ordeal. I just wanted to take my family on a proper adventure, away from the screens and city noise. I thought it would be a bonding experience, but I was wrong. Dead wrong. I stood at the edge of the trail, the morning sun filtering weakly through the canopy. My wife, Marie, adjusted the straps on her hiking pack, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her expression uneasy. Our kids, Max and Lucy, trailed a few paces behind. Max, 12 and full of restless energy, clutched a pocket notebook where he scribbled cryptid sightings and urban legends. 8-year-old Lucy, on the other hand, skipped alongside him, humming a tune she seemed to make up as she went. "This is supposed to be fun," I said, more to myself than anyone. The truth was, the deeper we went, the heavier the forest felt. It was like the trees pressed in too close, their trunks leaning inward as though eavesdropping on our every word. "You sure about this, Jack?" Marie's voice broke the silence as she squinted at the map I'd printed from the internet. "Positive," I replied, though my confidence was wavering. It's a little off the beaten path, but that's the point. Fresh air, no distractions. Marie sighed but didn't argue. That was one of the things I loved about her. She trusted me, even when she probably shouldn't. We reached the campsite in the late afternoon. It was a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. I set to work pitching the tent while Marie unpacked. That's when the first snag hit, literally. The tent poles were bent, warped beyond use. "Seriously?" I muttered, holding one up. Marie raised an eyebrow but kept silent. After some improvisation, I managed to rig a shelter using the tarp and some rope. It wasn't pretty, but it would do. Dinner was another struggle. Our portable stove sputtered once and died, forcing us to roast hot dogs over the fire. The kids didn't seem to mind, but I caught Marie eyeing the darkening forest, her unease growing. "I don't like how quiet it is," she whispered once the kids were distracted. "It's nature, Marie," I said with a grin, but even I noticed the lack of usual forest sounds. No bird song, no rustling in the underbrush, just silence, heavy and oppressive. That night, things started to feel off. Lucy woke us up screaming. "What is it?" I said, rushing to her side. She was sitting up in her sleeping bag, tears streaming down her face. "He was here," she sobbed, pointing at the entrance of the tarp. "He was watching me." "Who, Lucy?" She hesitated, her little hands trembling. "My tall friend. He has no face." Marie shivered beside me, pulling Lucy close. "It's just a nightmare," I assured them, but even I didn't believe it. The next morning, Max discovered clawed footprints near the fire pit. They were massive, unlike anything I'd ever seen, and they circled our campsite in deliberate loops. "Bear," I said, though my voice faltered. Max looked unconvinced. "Bears don't leave claw marks like this." Marie took pictures with her camera, her hands shaking as she reviewed the shots. She went pale. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing," she said too quickly, but I caught a glimpse of the screen. Among the trees there was a shadow, a figure, tall and gaunt, with elongated limbs. By midday, the unease had settled into full-blown dread. Marie and I whispered about leaving, but I didn't want to cut the trip short. I couldn't let fear ruin the experience. That was a mistake. That night, the forest came alive in the worst way. We were sitting around the fire when the howls began, low and mournful, echoing through the trees. "Coyotes," I said, but Max shook his head. "They don't sound right." He was right. The howls were wrong. They rose and fell unnaturally, almost human-like, but with a twisted edge that made my skin crawl. Then came the snapping branches, closer and closer, until something brushed against the tarp. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees, yet the feeling of being watched was unbearable. When I turned back, I froze. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the firelight, stood a figure. It was impossibly tall, its limbs too long, its face a pale void. I blinked, and it was gone. "We need to leave," Marie said once we were back under the tarp. She held Lucy close, her eyes darting to every shadow. Max sat stiffly, clutching his notebook like a talisman. "We'll go at first light," I promised, but we didn't make it that far. Around midnight, something tore through our supplies. I woke to the sound of ripping fabric and guttural growls. Grabbing a flashlight, I shone it outside to find our food scattered, clawed apart. The creature's tracks circled our shelter again, fresh and deliberate. Lucy began to cry softly, and Max whispered, "It's hunting us." "We'll be fine," I lied, though my heart pounded in my chest. By dawn, the decision was clear. We had to leave. Packing what little we had left, we started down the trail, but the forest didn't let us go easily. The trees seemed closer, the path narrower, the air colder, and the howls followed us, distant but persistent. Then Lucy stopped abruptly. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Marie asked. She pointed ahead. "He's waiting for us." I turned and saw it again. The creature stood in the middle of the trail, impossibly still. Its hollow eyes seemed to pierce through me, and when it moved, it didn't walk. It glided, closing the distance without a sound. "Run!" I yelled, shoving my family ahead. The creature gave chase, its movements jerky yet horrifyingly fast. Branches snapped around us, and the air filled with that terrible howl. I made a choice then, a terrible, final choice. "Go to the ranger station," I shouted. "I'll distract it." "Jack, no," Marie screamed, but there was no time. I grabbed a branch and swung it wildly, drawing the creature's attention. It stopped, tilting its head as if studying me. Then it lunged. I ran, leading it away from my family. The forest blurred around me, my lungs burning. I didn't look back, not even when I felt its breath on my neck. The last thing I remember is tripping, the ground rushing up to meet me, and the creature's shadow falling over me. When I woke, the forest was silent. The creature was gone. My family was safe, though I paid a price I'll never fully understand. We never found out what it was, and I doubt we ever will. But the forest remembers, and so do we. Sometimes late at night I hear the howls again and wonder if it's still out there, waiting for its next prey. My name is Benjamin Hamilton, and in 2018, I took my RV up to the remote corners of Kluane National Park in the Yukon Territory. I figured that after years of crunching numbers as an accountant, a little adventure might do me some good. Always the guy behind the desk, I wanted to be the guy behind the wheel for once. The drive was long but breathtaking. Towering mountains draped in glaciers loomed over dense forests, and the air was so crisp it felt like a tonic. I parked my RV at a secluded spot near a pristine lake, the kind of place you'd see on a postcard. It was just me, the wilderness, and a stack of mystery novels I'd been meaning to read. On the second day, I met a fellow camper named Hank, a grizzled old-timer with a beard that could house a family of birds. He was full of stories about the area. "You picked a heck of a spot, Dorian," he said. "Not many folks come out this far. Keeps the riff-raff out." Well, except for us accountants seeking thrills, I quipped. He chuckled. Just keep an eye out for the wildlife. Bears around here have a sweet tooth for city folk. We shared a laugh, and he offered me some freshly caught trout before heading back to his campsite. That night, I cooked the fish over a campfire, feeling more content than I had in years. The stars overhead were so bright they seemed to poke holes in the sky. The following morning, I decided to hike a nearby trail Hank had mentioned. It was supposedly an old trading route used by First Nations people, rarely trodden these days. Armed with a map, a compass, and my questionable sense of direction, I set off. About an hour into the hike, I stumbled upon something unusual, a series of wooden carvings hanging from the trees. They were intricate, depicting various animals and symbols I didn't recognize. One looked like a wolf, intertwined with vines. Another was a raven with outstretched wings. Local art installation? I mused aloud. Banksy, eat your heart out. As I ventured deeper, the carvings became more frequent and more unsettling. One showed a human figure with antlers surrounded by flames. Another depicted a face with hollow eyes and an open mouth, as if screaming. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the northern air. Deciding it was best to head back, I turned around, only to hear a rustling in the bushes behind me. Probably just a squirrel on steroids, I told myself, picking up the pace. The rustling grew louder, now accompanied by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. I glanced over my shoulder but saw nothing. The forest seemed denser than before, the trees pressing in like silent onlookers. Hello, is someone there? I called out. No response, just the wind whispering through the branches. I continued walking, my casual stroll now a hurried stride. Then I saw it, a figure darting between the trees. Too large for an animal, too swift for a casual hiker. Okay, Dorian, time to break that personal best in the 100-meter dash, I muttered. I broke into a jog, then a run. The footsteps behind me quickened. My heart pounded in my chest like a frantic drum solo. In my haste, I tripped over an exposed root and went sprawling onto the ground. Great! Taken down by a tree's toe, I groaned as I scrambled to my feet. A man emerged from the trees. He was tall and gaunt, wearing tattered clothes stained with dirt. And was that blood? His hair was wild, a tangled mane that framed a face etched with grime and something else. Malice. Lost? He asked, a crooked grin spreading across his face. Just heading back to my campsite, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Beautiful day for a hike, isn't it? He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. You shouldn't be here. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing, I said, attempting a disarming smile. He took a step closer. I noticed he was holding something, a hunting knife, its blade glinting ominously. Folks around here don't take kindly to trespassers, he said. Trespassing? I thought this was a national park, I replied, inching backward. Belongs to those who respect the land, he hissed. I decided then that conversation was overrated. Spinning on my heel, I bolted down the path. Adrenaline surged through me, and for a moment I felt like an Olympic sprinter, minus the cheering crowd and the gold medal. Behind me I heard him give chase. His footsteps were heavy, but he was fast, too fast. The trail forked, and without thinking, I veered left. Bad choice. The path led to a steep incline strewn with rocks. I scrambled upward, my legs burning with effort. Can't run forever, he shouted. Watch me, I yelled back, though I doubted the wisdom of taunting a knife-wielding maniac. Reaching the top, I spotted a dilapidated cabin nestled among the trees. Smoke curled lazily from a makeshift chimney. Maybe someone inside can help, I thought. I sprinted toward the cabin and banged on the door. Hello, is anyone home? I need help. No answer. The door was ajar, and without hesitation I pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was a shrine of horrors. Animal skulls adorned the walls, and the stench of decay was overpowering. On a wooden table lay various tools, some rusty, others ominously clean. Well, this isn't the cozy cottage I was hoping for, I whispered. A quick survey of the room revealed no weapons, but I grabbed a hefty-looking fireplace poker. Footsteps approached the doorway. Come out, wherever you are, the man sang mockingly. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, holding my breath as he stepped inside. I swung the poker with all my might. It connected with his forearm, causing him to drop the knife. He let out a guttural yell, a deep, rage-filled shout. Before he could recover, I darted past him, knocking over a shelf of jars filled with unidentifiable contents. "You're only making it worse for yourself," he roared. I didn't stick around for further discussion. Racing back down the trail, I aimed for a different route, hoping to throw him off. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. "Next time, Dorian, maybe stick to beaches and pina coladas," I chided myself as I ran. I stumbled upon a grisly sight, a shallow grave with a partially buried body. The exposed hand was pale and lifeless. Nearby, a backpack lay ripped open, its contents strewn about, a map, a water bottle, and a journal. Swallowing hard, I forced myself to keep moving. The reality of the danger was now stark and undeniable. The trees thinned, and I burst into a clearing where Hank's campsite was supposed to be. But instead of his modest tent, there was chaos. The tent was slashed to ribbons, and blood stained the ground. "No, not Hank," I whispered. A noise behind me made me spin around. The man was there, his eyes wild, a second knife in his hand. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted. He grinned. "The land demands sacrifice." "Look, if it's about the trout, I can catch you another one," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. He lunged at me. I dodged, but not fast enough. A searing pain shot through my arm as the knife grazed me. In a panic, I grabbed a metal camping chair and hurled it at him. Seizing the moment, I sprinted toward my RV. Reaching the door, I jumped inside and locked it just as he reached me. "There's nowhere to go," he screamed. "Funny, this thing's got wheels," I muttered. After reaching town, the police investigated, but Elias Crowther had vanished. I left the Yukon the next day, the open road ahead, and a newfound appreciation for the predictable dangers of city life. My name is Samuel Ford, and back in 2018, I took my RV up to Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. I figured a solo trip into the wild would be the perfect antidote to my cubicle-induced claustrophobia. Plus, after burning yet another batch of spaghetti at home, I thought maybe, just maybe, the wilderness would help me find my inner Bear Grylls, or at least teach me how not to set off the smoke alarm. I arrived at the park on a crisp August morning. The air was so fresh it felt like nature's version of a deep breath. I parked my RV in a secluded spot near a glacial stream, thinking I'd found my own little slice of paradise. The only neighbors I had were towering pines and the occasional moose, who looked at me like I was the intruder, which, to be fair, I was. After setting up camp, I decided to explore the surroundings, armed with a map, a compass I pretended to know how to use, and a trail mix that was 90% chocolate. I ventured into the forest. The serenity was overwhelming. For once, the only notifications I heard were birds chirping and leaves rustling. It was a far cry from the constant ping of emails back home. About an hour into my hike, I stumbled upon a small, weathered cabin nestled between the trees. It looked abandoned, with ivy crawling up the sides and windows clouded by dust. Curiosity got the better of me. I thought, why not take a peek? After all, what's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, I know. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, revealing a single-room interior cluttered with old furniture and hunting gear. Animal traps, fishing rods, and a wall adorned with antlers suggested that whoever lived here was serious about off-the-grid living, or just had a very specific decorating style. On a dusty table lay a journal. The pages were filled with scribbled notes and sketches of the surrounding area. One entry caught my eye. August 12th, spotted another hiker today. Must be cautious, can't let anyone find out. That was yesterday's date. A chill settled in my gut. Maybe the cabin wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. I decided it was best to head back to my RV. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountains, and I didn't want to navigate the forest in the dark. As I retraced my steps, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. Every snap of a twig and rustling leaf set my nerves on edge. I told myself I was being paranoid, perhaps a side effect of too many late-night horror movies and bad campfire stories. Back at the campsite, I cooked dinner over the fire, a culinary masterpiece of canned beans and slightly burnt sausages. I mused that Gordon Ramsay would have a field day critiquing my cooking skills. "It's so raw, it might just get up and walk away," I imagined him shouting. I chuckled into the night, the sound echoing among the trees. To lighten the mood further, I started telling jokes to myself. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. I laughed, appreciating my own terrible sense of humor. It was just me in the wilderness, and I was determined to enjoy every minute. Just as I was considering turning in for the night, I heard a noise, a faint rustling coming from the edge of the clearing. Probably just an animal, I thought. Alaska is full of wildlife. Then I heard it again, louder this time, accompanied by the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. Human footsteps. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Silence. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the tree line. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow dart between the trees. My heart began to race. Maybe it was another camper, or perhaps my mind was playing tricks on me. Deciding that sitting outside made me feel too exposed, I retreated into the RV and locked the door. I felt a bit silly for being spooked, but better safe than sorry. I settled into bed, convincing myself that a good night's sleep would put everything into perspective. I woke abruptly to a loud thud against the side of the RV. My pulse quickened. That was no falling branch. I listened intently, straining to hear any other sounds. Then came another thud, harder this time, causing the RV to sway slightly. I quietly got out of bed and reached for the small kitchen knife I'd used earlier. Not exactly a weapon of choice, but it was better than nothing. I crept toward the window and peeked out, but the darkness revealed nothing. Suddenly, the RV's door handle jiggled. Someone was trying to get in. Panic surged through me. "Hey, who's out there?" I shouted, hoping to deter whoever it was. The jiggling stopped momentarily, only to resume more aggressively. I had to think fast. My phone had no signal, so calling for help was out of the question. Then I remembered the flare gun stowed away in a cabinet, a safety precaution I never thought I'd need. I grabbed it and positioned myself facing the door. "Leave now, or I'll shoot," I warned. The handle stopped moving. Silence enveloped the RV. Just when I thought it might be over, a heavy object slammed against the door, cracking the frame. I fired the flare gun at the door, the bright light illuminating the interior in a flash of red. The impact startled the intruder, and I heard footsteps retreating into the woods. Breathing heavily, I waited for any sign of return. Minutes passed like hours. When everything remained quiet, I dared to hope that it was over. Sleep was out of the question, so I sat vigil until dawn, clutching the kitchen knife with a white-knuckled grip. As the first light seeped through the windows, I decided to step outside and assess the damage. The door was splintered, hanging ajar from its hinges. On the ground lay a heavy piece of timber, likely used to batter the door. But what caught my attention was a symbol carved into the wood, a crude drawing of an eye with a slash through it. I snapped a photo with my phone, thinking it might be useful evidence. Just then, I heard voices in the distance, multiple people talking and laughing. Relief washed over me. Other campers, perhaps. I headed toward the sound, hoping to find help. As I approached, I realized the voices were coming from a small group gathered around a makeshift campsite. They were an odd bunch, dressed in ragged clothes, their faces smudged with dirt. They fell silent as soon as they noticed me. "Morning," I said cautiously. "Did you folks happen to see anyone around here last night?" One of them, a tall man with a tangled beard, stepped forward. "No one but us out here," he replied, his gaze steady and unblinking. I noticed something unsettling. The same eye symbol from the timber was tattooed on his forearm. A knot tightened in my stomach. "Interesting tattoo," I remarked, trying to keep my tone light. "It's more than a tattoo," he said. "Right. Well, if you see anyone suspicious, let me know. Someone tried to break into my RV last night." He gave a faint smile. The forest doesn't take kindly to trespassers. I decided it was time to leave. All right then, have a good day. I turned to walk away, feeling their eyes on my back like a physical weight. As I hurried back to my RV, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled into something dangerous. I resolved to pack up and get out of there as fast as possible. When I returned, I found my RV ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, belongings scattered, and the words, "Leave now," were scrawled across the wall in what looked like charcoal. My heart pounded in my chest. This was no longer just a creepy encounter. It was a direct threat. I gathered what I could and started the engine. As I drove down the dirt road leading out of the park, I caught sight of something in the rearview mirror. The group from earlier, standing in the middle of the road, watching me leave. Just when I thought I was safe, a loud bang echoed from the side of the RV. The vehicle lurched, and I struggled to keep it on the road. I looked out the window to see one of my tires blown out. I cursed under my breath and pulled over to assess the damage. The tire was shredded, and upon closer inspection, I found a makeshift spike strip embedded with nails lying nearby. This was deliberate. Out of nowhere, a figure tackled me, knocking me to the ground. It was the bearded man from the campsite. He held a knife, his eyes wild with intent. We grappled, adrenaline fueling my movements. He slashed at me, grazing my arm. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, dodging another attack. "Outsiders aren't welcome here," he snarled. I kicked at his knee, causing him to stumble. Seizing the opportunity, I scrambled back toward the RV. Another member of the group appeared, blocking my path. She swung a metal pipe at me. I ducked, and it smashed into the RV's side mirror. Desperate, I remembered the flare gun still tucked into my belt. I pulled it out and aimed it at them. "Back off!" I shouted. They hesitated, eyeing the weapon. The woman sneered. "That toy won't save you." She advanced. Without thinking, I fired. The flare struck her shoulder, igniting her clothes. She screamed, dropping to the ground to extinguish the flames. The bearded man charged at me in a rage. I sidestepped, causing him to crash into the side of the RV. The impact dazed him. I took the chance to climb into the driver's seat and slam the door shut. I started the engine. Despite the flat tire, the RV lurched forward, grinding against the road. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. As I sped down the rough path, the vehicle shook violently. The other tires threatened to give out, but I pushed on. In the distance, I saw a ranger station. Relief flooded over me. I pulled up, haphazardly honking the horn wildly. A park ranger emerged, alarmed by the sight of my battered RV and my disheveled state. "Please, I need help," I shouted. He approached cautiously. "Calm down, sir. What's going on?" A group of people attacked me. They're back there, sabotaging the road and attacking campers. His expression grew serious. "Did you say a group?" "Yes, they tried to break into my RV last night and attacked me on the road." He radioed for backup. "And you're lucky you made it here. We've had reports of a cult operating in the remote areas of the park." "A cult? They're hostile to outsiders. We've been trying to track them down." Another ranger arrived. They escorted me inside and tended to my wounds. I gave a full account of what happened, showing them the photo of the symbol and describing the attackers. Over the next few hours, law enforcement combed the area. They found the spike strip and evidence of the group's campsite, but the cult members had disappeared. I was advised to stay in town until they could ensure the area was safe. They arranged for my RV to be repaired, and I checked into a local motel. At the motel, the receptionist looked up as I approached the desk. "Rough day?" she asked, eyeing my torn sleeve and bandaged arm. "You could say that," I replied. "I've had better Mondays." "At least you didn't have to sit through a budget meeting." She chuckled. "Well, we've got cable and hot water. Sometimes that's all you need. Throw in a decent cup of coffee, and you might just convince me to stay forever." The following day, news came in. The authorities had discovered several shallow graves near where my RV had been parked. The bodies of missing hikers were recovered, victims of the cult's gruesome acts. I realized how close I'd come to becoming one of them. As for the cult, they remained at large. Their leader, identified as Marcus Hale, was a former survivalist with a history of violent offenses. He had gathered a group of like-minded individuals, preying on unsuspecting campers and hikers. I decided it was time to head home. The allure of the wilderness had lost its charm. Before leaving, I thanked the rangers for their help and provided any additional information they needed. I drove out of Alaska, the road stretching ahead like a promise of safety. As I left, I couldn't help but think about Marcus Hale, a man who had turned his back on society, choosing isolation and violence over humanity. I drove on the open road ahead, leaving the shadows of the forest and its secrets behind. My name is Gregory Graham, and in 2014, I took my RV out to the remote stretches of the Yukon Territory in Canada. Being cooped up in an office for years had me yearning for some real adventure and fresh air. I figured a solo trip into the wilderness would be just the ticket to reset my mind. I had always been an outdoor enthusiast, but life's responsibilities kept pushing my plans further down the line. Finally, I decided enough was enough. I packed up my gear, loaded the RV, and set off for Kluane National Park. The idea of vast landscapes and untouched nature was too alluring to resist. The drive up was uneventful, filled with the usual mix of truckers and fellow travelers. I made a stop in a small town called Haines Junction to stock up on supplies. The locals were friendly, but gave me that look. You know, the one that says, "You're not from around here, are you?" One old-timer at the general store chuckled when I told him where I was headed. "Watch out for the gold," he said with a grin. "Gold?" I replied, raising an eyebrow. "Folks around here get crazy when it comes to gold," he added before shuffling away. I shrugged it off, assuming it was just local humor that went over my city slicker head. With my RV loaded, I continued toward the park. The scenery became more breathtaking with each mile, the kind of beauty that makes you forget about emails and deadlines. I found a secluded spot near a crystal-clear lake, surrounded by towering mountains. Setting up camp, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I spent the day hiking and snapping photos, marveling at how untouched everything felt. That evening, I built a small fire and settled in with a book. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves or distant animal calls. As night fell, the temperature dropped significantly. I retreated into the RV, thankful for the small heater I had installed. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard a faint noise outside, like metal clinking. Probably just settling sounds, I told myself. But then it happened again, louder this time. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The cold air hit me instantly, my breath forming small clouds. Scanning the area, I saw nothing unusual. The RV stood alone under the starlit sky, and the forest edge was shrouded in darkness. "Must be hearing things," I muttered, turning to go back inside. That's when I noticed footprints near the back of the RV, fresh ones that weren't mine. They led toward the woods and disappeared among the trees. A chill ran down my spine, and not just from the cold. I decided it was best to lock up and stay inside for the night. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the windows, and the uneasy feeling from the night before seemed almost silly. I convinced myself it was probably a hunter or another camper passing by. After breakfast, I decided to explore a nearby trail that promised stunning views. About an hour into the hike, I stumbled upon something that made me stop in my tracks. A rusty pickaxe leaning against a tree with a worn leather bag beside it. Curiosity piqued, I approached and nudged the bag with my foot. Out spilled a collection of old mining tools and a small glass vial filled with gold flakes. "Well, would you look at that?" I said aloud. Maybe the old-timer wasn't joking after all. I considered taking the vial, but thought better of it. The last thing I needed was to get involved in someone else's business. As I continued along the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every so often I'd hear a twig snap or leaves rustle, but whenever I turned around, nothing was there. Deciding I'd had enough hiking for one day, I headed back to camp. As I approached, I noticed smoke rising in the distance, not from my sight, but somewhere nearby. It seemed odd given how isolated this place was. Behind the RV, I made a sandwich and tried to relax, but an uneasiness settled in. To distract myself, I pulled out my fishing gear and walked down to the lake. The water was so clear you could see the fish swimming near the surface. I cast my line and waited. "Not biting today, huh?" I said after an hour with no luck. Just then, a voice behind me replied, "Fish around here don't care much for strangers." I nearly jumped out of my skin, spinning around. A man stood a few feet away, rugged-looking, with a thick beard and clothes that had seen better days. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said with a crooked smile. "No worries," I replied, trying to steady my voice. "Didn't hear you coming." "I'm used to moving quietly," he said, stepping closer. "Name's Silas." "Nolan," I offered, extending a hand. He looked at it for a moment before shaking it. "Firm grip." "What brings you out to these parts?" he asked. "Just taking some time off work, enjoying nature," I said. He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning me up and down. "Not many folks come out here alone." "I like the solitude," I replied, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "Solitude's a funny thing," he mused. "Can make a man see and do strange things." "Well, I should probably get back," I said, reeling in my line. "Sure thing. Be seeing you around," he said, that crooked smile returning. I hurried back to the RV, glancing over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't following me. Something about Silas didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way he appeared out of nowhere, or how he seemed to savor each word he spoke. That evening, I decided to keep a low profile. I locked all the doors and windows, drew the shades, and kept the lights dimmed. As the hours passed, I started to feel a bit silly. Maybe I was overreacting. Around midnight, just as I was about to call it a night, I heard footsteps circling the RV. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached for the closest thing resembling a weapon, a cast-iron skillet. The footsteps stopped near the door. There was a scratching sound, followed by a low chuckle. My palms were sweaty as I gripped the skillet tighter. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. Silence, then a whispered reply, "Just enjoying the night air." It was Silas. "What do you want?" I demanded. "Thought you might like some company," he said. "I'm fine on my own, thanks." "Funny thing about being alone," he continued. "You never know what's lurking around." "Leave me alone," I shouted. The doorknob rattled as he tried to open it. "Now that's not very hospitable," he said. I backed away, my mind racing. The keys were in the ignition. I could start the RV and get out of here, but what if he tried to block me? I had to think fast. Suddenly, a loud thud came from the roof, followed by the sound of footsteps overhead. My eyes darted upward. How many of them were there? Desperate, I dashed to the driver's seat, tossing the skillet aside. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Without wasting a second, I slammed it into gear and hit the gas. The RV lurched forward, knocking whoever was on the roof off balance. In the rearview mirror, I saw Silas stumbling to his feet, a look of rage contorting his face. The narrow dirt road was treacherous in the dark, but adrenaline fueled my focus. Branches scraped against the sides as I sped down the path. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the main road, breathing a sigh of relief. I slowed down, but then headlights appeared in the distance behind me. 2 motorcycles, gaining fast. Panic surged. "Seriously? What is this? A horror movie?" I muttered, trying to inject some humor into a dire situation. I floored the accelerator, but the RV wasn't built for speed. The motorcycles closed the gap quickly. One pulled up alongside me, and I caught a glimpse of the rider, another rugged-looking man, his face partially covered by a bandana. He swung something heavy against the side window, a metal chain. The glass cracked but didn't shatter. "Not today," I shouted, swerving the RV toward him. He veered off, losing control and skidding into the brush. The second rider was more persistent. He pulled ahead and tried to block the road. I had no choice. Clenching my jaw, I gripped the wheel and rammed the RV into his bike. He tumbled away as I sped past. Heart pounding, I kept driving until the sun began to rise. I reached a larger town and pulled into a gas station, shaking from the ordeal. I stumbled inside and told the clerk to call the police. Within minutes, officers arrived. I recounted everything. The encounters with Silas, the attack, the chase. They exchanged glances. "You're not the first to report something like this," one officer said grimly. "Excuse me?" "There's a group operating in these parts," he continued. "Illegal miners protecting their claims. They've been known to intimidate, or worse." "Illegal miners? Like gold miners?" I asked, recalling the old-timers' warning. "Exactly. They don't take kindly to outsiders stumbling upon their operations," he said. "They took my statement and assured me they'd investigate." Exhausted, I decided to find a motel and get some rest. Later that day, curiosity got the better of me. Using my laptop, I dug into local news and forums. Stories surfaced about missing hikers, unexplained disappearances, and rumors of a shadowy group guarding hidden mines. One article mentioned a man named Silas Harper, a former geologist turned illegal miner, suspected in multiple disappearances but never charged due to lack of evidence. "Great. I had a run-in with a psycho prospector," I muttered. I informed the police about what I found, hoping it would help their investigation. A few days later, I prepared to head home. As I was fueling up, I overheard two men talking. "Another camper went missing up near Clane," one said. "Must have crossed paths with Silas and his crew," the other replied. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't over for others out there. Driving away, I couldn't shake the thought of those still venturing into the wilderness, unaware of the dangers lurking, not from nature, but from those guarding their secrets with deadly resolve. Silas Harper, a man driven by greed, willing to do anything to protect his hidden gold mines, no matter the cost. My name is Alexander Simmons. I'm 34 years old, and I used to be a park ranger before I shifted to city planning. I've always been the type to keep a level head under pressure, but that weekend in Ocala National Forest changed the way I see the world, and myself, forever. It's hard to explain what we encountered without sounding insane, but I'll do my best. This happened in April 2012. My girlfriend, Emma, two friends, Tyler and Kelly, and I decided to take an RV trip into the heart of Ocala. Emma, 30, has always been an avid nature enthusiast, and she had been itching to show us Alexander Springs, where the water is crystal clear and the trails promise adventure. Tyler, 28, my childhood friend, and Kelly, his girlfriend, were tagging along, mostly because they loved camping, though Kelly was more into the safety of RV life than the rugged outdoors. Looking back, I wish I had trusted Kelly's unease from the start. We arrived at our campsite around mid-afternoon on a Friday, excited to leave behind the noise of the city. The RV, which I'd borrowed from my brother, was parked in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. The air smelled fresh, the kind of scent you can only get deep in the woods. We unpacked quickly, tents for Tyler and Kelly, while Emma and I would use the RV. "See? Perfect," Tyler said, slapping me on the back. "We needed this, man. Get the old crew together." Emma was already wandering the edge of the woods with her camera. "The biodiversity here is incredible," she called back, her voice tinged with excitement. "It's so quiet, though." It was quiet, eerily so. Usually you'd hear birds chirping, insects buzzing, something. Instead, the forest felt like it was holding its breath. I chalked it up to being farther out than usual. That first night was uneventful. We built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and told the same dumb stories Tyler and I had been recycling since we were teenagers. Kelly, however, seemed uncomfortable. She kept glancing over her shoulder and leaning closer to Tyler. "What's up?" I asked her. "Nothing," she muttered. It's so dark out here." "It's the woods, Kel," Tyler said with a grin. "It's supposed to be dark." We laughed it off and went to bed. I didn't know it then, but the forest had already started watching us. The next morning, Emma convinced us to hike a nearby trail. She was thrilled to explore, and I figured it'd be good to stretch our legs. Kelly was reluctant, but joined anyway. We hadn't gone far when Emma froze. She pointed at the ground, a single footprint, barefoot and large. But it wasn't just big. The toes were elongated, tipped with what looked like claw marks. Bear, Tyler guessed. No, Emma said, crouching. Bears don't leave prints like this. Kelly took a step back. Let's just go back. This feels wrong. Relax, Tyler said, brushing it off. It's probably some weird hiker. People are strange out here. Emma shot me a glance, her brows knitted. I nodded for her to keep walking. The hike became more unsettling the farther we went. The quieter the woods got, the more deliberate the occasional snapping of twigs sounded, like something was following us. Kelly kept muttering that she wanted to turn around, and even Tyler's usual cockiness began to falter. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. By the time we got back to camp, everyone was tense. We decided to stick close to the RV for the evening. As I gathered firewood near the edge of the clearing, I heard Emma calling my name. James! It was distant, coming from deeper in the woods. I frowned. Emma had been by the fire a minute ago. James! Come here! The voice was louder now, insistent. My gut told me something was off, but curiosity won out. I stepped into the tree line. Emma? I called. The voice stopped. I turned back toward camp and nearly collided with Emma herself. Where were you going? She asked, breathless. I heard you, I said, shaken. You were calling me. Her face went pale. I didn't say anything. That night, things got worse. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of movement outside the RV, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching the pine needles. I nudged Emma awake and whispered for her to stay quiet. Peering through the curtain, I spotted a figure near the fire pit. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, and its posture was bent, as though it had been broken and pieced back together. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out, heart hammering. Who's there? I barked. The figure turned to look at me, and I swear it smiled, not a friendly smile, but a wide, unnatural grin that made my stomach churn. Before I could react, it darted into the woods with animalistic speed, leaving no trace. The next morning, we found deep claw marks on the side of the RV and the smoldering remains of our firewood scattered around. Tyler laughed nervously. Okay, so someone's messing with us. Someone? Emma shot back. You think a person did that? It's probably a prank, Tyler insisted. Locals messing with tourists. Kelly wasn't convinced. This isn't normal, Tyler. That thing last night wasn't human, Emma spoke up. There's a Navajo legend about skinwalkers, shapeshifters that take the form of animals or people to deceive you. They can mimic voices, even faces. This isn't the Southwest, Tyler scoffed. That's a desert legend. Legends travel, Emma snapped. And whatever it is, it's here. The argument spiraled until I stepped in. Enough, we're leaving. Pack up and let's go. As we scrambled to break camp, the forest closed in. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional crack of branches, far too close for comfort. Kelly stayed by the RV, clutching her arms as if shielding herself from something unseen. Then we heard it, Tyler's voice calling from the woods. Guys, I found something. Come check it out. We froze. Tyler was right next to me, his face draining of color. Stay here, I said, grabbing a flashlight and stepping into the trees. Tyler followed despite my protests. The deeper we went, the darker it became. Then we saw it, a figure standing between the pines, its back to us. It looked just like Tyler. Hey, I shouted. The figure turned, its face a twisted, grotesque mockery of Tyler's features. Its eyes were too large, its mouth stretched too wide. Before we could react, it let out a guttural, inhuman screech and charged. We bolted back to camp, adrenaline pumping. We're leaving now, I shouted. Everyone piled into the RV as I started the engine. The tires spun in the loose dirt before catching, and we sped down the forest road. But the thing didn't stop. It ran alongside us, its limbs moving in unnatural jerks. Its mouth formed words that weren't quite right. James, its voice distorted. Don't leave. Emma screamed as it slammed against the side of the RV, claws screeching against the metal. Tyler grabbed a hatchet from the supplies and swung wildly at the window, shattering the glass and forcing the creature to fall back. We didn't stop until we reached a ranger station at the edge of the forest, shaking and covered in scratches from the shattered glass. The ranger took one look at us. "Around Alexander Springs?" he asked. We nodded. He sighed. "You're lucky you made it out." We never talked about that trip again. Tyler and I drifted apart after that, and Kelly refused to camp ever again. Emma became obsessed with the legends, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. As for me, I haven't set foot in the woods since. Some places are wild not because of the animals or terrain, but because something else lives there, something that watches, waits, and hungers. My name is Raymond Flores, and I'm 40 years old. This happened in late October during a weekend camping trip to Falling Waters State Park in Florida. I was there with my wife, Linda, our 9-year-old daughter, Sarah, and our 8-year-old son, Joey. What started as an ordinary family trip turned into something I'll never forget, though sometimes I wish I could. We had planned the trip as a way to disconnect from screens and reconnect as a family. I wanted to teach my kids a bit about survival skills, maybe show them how to start a fire or identify edible plants. Linda was on board, even though she had her reservations about the old RV I insisted on driving. It had its quirks, flickering lights and an engine that sometimes took a few tries to start, but I was confident it would get us through. When we arrived at Falling Waters State Park, the sun was just beginning to set. The golden light filtered through the tall pine trees, and the sound of distant birdsong filled the air. The kids were already squabbling over who got which bunk bed in the RV, and Linda sighed as she unpacked a cooler full of sandwiches and snacks. "This is going to be good for us," I said, giving her a reassuring smile. "Fresh air, family bonding, it's what we need." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the dense woods surrounding our campsite. "Sure, as long as nothing breaks down." That evening, we gathered around a small fire I built. Joey poked at the flames with a stick, and Sarah sat off to the side, scribbling in a notebook she had brought along for stories. She had a vivid imagination, always making up tales about fairies and witches. Linda read a book, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the firelight. "What are you writing about, kiddo?" I asked Sarah. She looked up and smiled. "A friend I met today." My heart sank for a moment, thinking she might have wandered off and spoken to a stranger. "What friend?" "Ellie," she said matter-of-factly. "She lives by the waterfall." I exchanged a glance with Linda. "You didn't go off alone, did you?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I didn't meet her in person. She just started talking to me when we got here." Linda frowned. "Honey, it's okay to have an imaginary friend, but don't scare your dad like that." Sarah's expression darkened. "She's not imaginary." I didn't push it. Kids have wild imaginations, and I figured it was just part of her storytelling hobby. The first truly strange thing happened later that night. I was outside stoking the fire one last time before bed when I heard it, faint laughter coming from the woods. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. I stood still, straining to hear over the crackle of the fire. "Kids?" I called, but they were already inside the RV with Linda. The laughter faded, and I told myself it was probably another camper. Still, it put me on edge. The next morning, Linda complained about a cold draft in the RV. "It's like someone left the door open," she said, pulling her cardigan tighter. I checked the door and the windows. Everything was locked up tight. We spent the day hiking to the park's main attraction, the waterfall. Sarah was unusually quiet, lagging behind and glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. Joey, on the other hand, was full of energy, running ahead and shouting, "Come on, slowpokes!" The trail led us to the waterfall, a beautiful cascade of water tumbling into a deep sinkhole. As we admired the view, Sarah tugged on my sleeve. "Ellie says this is where it happened," she whispered. "Where what happened?" I asked, my voice low. Sarah didn't answer. She just stared at the water. That night, the strangeness grew worse. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of faint knocking on the RV door. My first thought was that it was Joey playing a prank, but when I checked, both kids were asleep in their bunks. The knocking came again, this time from the back of the RV. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, my breath fogging in the cold night air. There were no footprints, no sign of anyone around, except for a single pair of child-sized, muddy prints leading toward the woods. The next morning, Sarah seemed withdrawn and Joey complained about bad dreams. Linda pulled me aside. "Something's not right here, Raymond," she said. "The kids aren't acting like themselves." I didn't want to admit it, but I felt it too. A heaviness in the air, a sense that we weren't alone. By the third day, things reached a breaking point. Sarah began talking to Ellie out loud, carrying on conversations as if the girl were standing right beside her. When Linda tried to intervene, Sarah shouted, "You're scaring her! She doesn't like it when you yell!" That night, I woke to the sound of the RV door creaking open. Sarah was gone. Panic surged through me as I grabbed a flashlight and followed her tiny footprints into the woods. I found her standing by the waterfall, her arms outstretched as if reaching for something. A faint figure stood in front of her, a young girl, soaking wet, her hair hanging in tangled strands over her pale face. "Sarah!" I shouted. The figure turned toward me and I froze. Her eyes were hollow black pits and her mouth twisted into a scream that echoed through the woods. Linda arrived moments later, clutching Joey's hand. Together, we pulled Sarah away from the water. The ghost didn't follow, but her presence lingered, oppressive and cold. Back in the RV, we tried to make sense of what was happening. Sarah, still dazed, murmured, "She's so lonely. She just wants someone to stay with her." I remembered the muddy footprints, the laughter, the feeling of being watched. "She's dangerous," I said. "We need to leave. Now." But the RV wouldn't start. The lights flickered and the air grew colder. A loud bang came from the roof, followed by the sound of scraping metal. Linda clutched my arm. "What does she want?" "She wants Sarah," I said, my voice trembling. Linda suggested offering Ellie something to appease her. Sarah hesitated, then handed over a doll she'd brought along. "Ellie can have this," she said, "so she won't be lonely anymore." We left the doll at the base of the waterfall, whispering a prayer for Ellie to find peace. For a moment, the woods fell silent, and I thought it was over. As we drove away, the RV finally roaring to life, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw Ellie standing at the edge of the woods, clutching the doll. Then she was gone. The kids were quieter on the ride home, and Linda seemed lost in thought. We didn't talk about what happened, not right away. But every now and then I catch Sarah staring out the window as if listening to someone I can't hear. And sometimes, when the house is quiet at night, I hear faint laughter just beyond the edge of the light.